Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Tori and this is my best friend Holland.
Hello.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. We'll break everything down as we go, so you won't be confused. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly because there are hot takes and spoilers. Cut to the intro. Okay, so today I chose the album Brand New Eyes by Paramore. This is familiar to both me and Holland. We've talked about Paramore on this show before. We've covered their Riot album, which was the album before this one. But if you're not familiar with Paramore or just need a refresher, I have some facts for us. So Brand New Eyes is the third album from Paramore. It was released September 29th, 2009 by Fueled by Ramen. It has 11 tracks and it totals at 40 minutes. So very easy listen through. I, for some reason, sat down expecting it to be longer and forgot that it's only 40 minutes. The band members at release were Hayley Williams on vocals, Josh Farrow on guitar and backing vocals, Taylor York on guitar, Jeremy Davis on bass, and Zach Farrow on the drums. This was produced in collaboration with Rob Cavallo, and it was recorded in Hidden Hills, California from January to March 2009. It was their first album with the touring guitarist Taylor York as a permanent member, and it was most tracks were written by Hayley Williams and Josh Farrow, with York contributing songwriting to 4 of those tracks. It was also the band's final album before Josh and Zach Farrow's departure from the band in 2010. Zach later rejoins the band in 2017 prior to their 5th album, which was After Laughter. Brand New Eyes debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 because it sold 175,000 copies in its first week, which for 2009 I think is pretty good.
Yeah.
Becoming their biggest album on that chart until their self-titled album debuted at number 1, which was in 2013. So just a few accolades. It went gold in Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and Ireland. It went platinum in the US and Australia, and it went double platinum in the UK and New Zealand. There's lots of Paramore fans in New Zealand, apparently.
Worldwide.
I didn't know that. So with that background info, Holland, do you want to go ahead and kick us off into our first category?
Sure. So for albums, our first category is lyrics and writing. So total possible points for this category is 2. I give this 1.5 points out of 2. In general, I think the writing on the song lyrically is done pretty well, especially considering the genre that it's in. It's kind of this like alternative rock, pop, punk genre. I don't know what it would be classified as today, but I think when it was released, it was considered like punk or like alternative.
Yeah.
But that's just a guess. I'm really not 100% sure.
Yeah.
I think now most people would say it's pop punk.
Right.
Because it's, well, I don't know.
It's got a lot of songwritery elements
Yeah.
to it, like singer-songwriter elements. I don't know. It's kind of an amalgamation, I think, of genres.
Yeah. I think that the genres nowadays like blend into one another.
Yeah.
So it's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think Paramore as a band would be considered a pop punk band, especially this era. But this album is a little hard to describe.
Yeah. I think that overall, my notes for this, I don't really have a big like summation of summation of this category, but I do think in general a lot of the songs are crafted really well lyrically. That's a little singer-songwritery in the sense that, like Riot, we talked about how there's a lot of poetry in the words and the way that the words move rhythmically are written. It's written not just for content, it's also written for like singability, playability, how it fits to the rhythm of the songs, and I think all of that is true in this album as well. I kind of took some notes, like track by track. I think So I'm just going to kind of go track by track for each one, just my thoughts in general. The first song on the album is Careful. I honestly don't think this song is really lyrically that great. I think it's a little generic. It's kind of a generic, like, one-off kind of like pop punk generic song about, breakup, romance, love, however you want to kind of look at it. I think Ignorance and Playing God are lyrically really more unique. Conceptually, I think it's a little bit more relationally content, and I think it's some of the phrasing is really unique, and yet it's still very catchy. I think the repetition in the bridge of Ignorance is written really nicely to kind of have this repetitive chorus where ignorance is your new best friend, ignorance is your new best friend, and then it flows back into more, of the verse and chorus of the song. That was the chorus. In the bridge of Ignorance, I also think it still has this, no, it does still repeat the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know if you'd call it like a bridge or like a post-chorus, but it's kind of that thing, Yeah. So the hook, the vocal or lyrical hook of the song.
Because it occurs multiple times, and then they repeat it and really are driving home like the core of the song. I think is that repetition and how it's used in the chorus. That line is in the chorus, and then the bridge is literally just like that over and over and over again. And I think rhythmically it fits really well, whereas it could come across as really repetitive and redundant. I think it's done really tastefully here to do that. Playing God, I think, also has that same repetition as well, where she says, I know you don't believe it, but the way I see it, and then, I might have to bend it back or break it off. And so the repetition, I think, is used really nicely instead of, sometimes it's repeating the whole line. Sometimes it's repeating half of the phrase before kind of sending home the rest of the phrase. And that's done really nicely in the sense that that's the core of what the song means. And so I like that repetition is done in a pop punk way versus like a very poppy, like bubblegum pop way, like cheerleader sounding repetition. Yeah. This is done more as like that more angsty anthem kind of repetition.
A good example of that, I would say, would be like a song that would be like sort of like the bubblegum pop repetition. Immediately came to mind Firework by Katy Perry. You know how she goes, and that's like a repeated like phrase. That's, I would consider that like a more like bubblegum pop example of that.
Yeah, or even like the song Hey Mickey, like and there's a lot of songs that have repetition that sound more cheerleader than like angsty like rock anthem, if you will. I think Brick by Boring Brick which is the fourth track of the album, it probably is one of the more poetic lyrically, more poetic lyrics. More poetic lyrics of the song, and yet it's still content-wise has universal appeal. So it's not so poetic that you're like, what the heck are they talking about? I can't understand anything that's going on. It still has that really broad net that it's kind of cast. I do think the only exception there is, you could argue that it's poetic, but I do think it's extremely repetitive. Like, You're the Only Exception is repeated over and over and over again in that song, and I don't think that lyrically it's quite as strong. I think content-wise, the message of the song, if you will, is a little bit more soft and more like romantic in concept, but I think that it's a little bit redundant and maybe goes on a little bit too long lyrically. So I think there's a little bit pros and cons, but I do think it's a little bit too repetitive. Feeling Sorry, I think lyrically is one of the strongest lyrically in this album. I think it's filled with a lot of meat and content, yet it's still written simply enough that you can catch on and sing along to the song. But I think content-wise, it's very strong lyrically. You can catch it on the first listen, but I think it's done really well. Looking Up and Where the Lines Overlap remind me a lot of the way in Riot Born for this was a little bit of like a band anthem. Like it's very clearly a song written kind of like by the band, yet it still has that kind of broad appeal. Whereas like Born for this, you can, it's kind of this very young, like we're all in this together anthem wise, not like High School Musical, but
that's what we all thought of, wasn't it?
But so Where the Lines Overlap and Looking Up, I think, have that same feel that I think is really relevant to the age group that this album kind of targets a little bit more. And yet it's still very much like about a band touring and like things are looking up, like, and how the band's working together, and like we're, traveling all over the world where the lines overlap and having a great time. And yet same way that Born for This in Riot is it appeals to more than just a band member. It's still relatable to like a wider audience. And so I think that that's written pretty well. I actually didn't write any notes about Misguided Ghosts on my paper, but I think it's written pretty well. Lyrically, though, this is probably going to be the hottest take of the album. I think that lyrically, All I Wanted is the worst song on the album. I think it is absolutely terribly written. I think that it's so repetitive, and it's like about someone pacing their apartment and like being sad, and I just have this mental image of like somebody soaking in their bathtub with sadness, and it's like, I get it. All you wanted was him. Like, all I wanted was you. And they just sing it over and over and over and over again. And I get it. Like, a lot of people relate to that. And I'm not saying that this is a bad song if you like this song. I just think objectively from a lyrical standpoint, we could have had a little bit of something in there. I think that, or had it, we'll talk about musicality and production later, but I don't think it's very strong lyrically. I mean, even the verses, it's very narrative in the way that it's written. There's not a lot of nuance to it. It's just like, I'm really sad. All I wanted was you. Yeah. And like, that's it. That's the whole message of the song. And then it just kind of repeats it over and over and over. And I do think that song is really long, which I think I would say attribute that to production as well. And I don't think it needs to be that long. But I know that song is like one of their most popular songs on the album. I think they sing it live almost every,
they do quite a bit.
They sing it live a lot. They sing The Only Exception live a lot too. Yeah. But, we're not talking about singing or vocal ability here or anything like that, but I just think that lyrically it's probably the weakest song on the album. I think it's very overhyped, personally. But so some aspects of the songs, I think it is a little bit of a, it misses the mark a little bit, but overall I think lyrically it's written really well. So I gave it 1.5 points because I think for this genre and this audience, I think it's pretty well done. So 1.5 out of 2.
Okay. For lyrics and writing, for me, I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2. I echo a lot of your perspectives, but I have some differing ones, so we'll talk about that. So one thing I really noticed when really looking at these tracks and lyrically is that, and I'll talk about this again when we get down to our 4th category, which is album flow and cohesion, is that this album does feel very thematic to me in a lot of ways. And you see a shift in what I would call the overall narrative of the lyrics and writing. We kind of start out with this big mood or theme of sort of this injustice defense. The lyrics are written in a very defensive way, you can't trust the people around you sometimes, you did me wrong and now you're trying to go back on that, the whole ignorance is your new best friend. That's a very defensive line to say, and I think all of those songs are written really nicely. And then the album shifts to more of a mood of it feels more like now we're looking back because now we feel like secure in where we are now, and so there's this level of like personal freedom and reminiscence and things like that. And sure, some of the songs in the latter half of the album have more of a sad tone, but the majority of them I'd say have a pretty upbeat or positive tone to them. And I think that the way that shift goes is very nice. To kind of go from like more of the offensive to kind of more of like a I'm cool with how things are right now vibe. So I like that mood shift. I like that theme. A lot of the songs tend to have this theme of like new perspective. This is true of both halves of the album, is that like, you know, sometimes something happens in your life and you all of a sudden your view on that is just completely changed in a moment. And I think that applies to some of the songs like Careful and Ignorance and even Brick by Boring Brick. And then we go down into songs like Feeling Sorry and what's the other one I'm thinking of? Let me look at the track list. Turn It Off. Those are songs that you kind of have a perspective shift. Like something happened and now I'm thinking about this differently. And I think that's a very interesting thread to tie through most songs on this album, is that I thought about it this way and now I'm thinking about it this way. And I just think that's like a sort of unusual common thread to see in an entire album, is how like your perspective can change. And now we're going to talk about that. And I think that that's just like a neat thing to notice. I like the fact that the song Ignorance, the chorus is basically conversation. And I think that's a very interesting way to kind of package it. You know, the lyrics go, you treat me just like another stranger. Well, it's nice to meet you, sir. I guess I'll go. I'll best be on my way out. Like, that's a very interesting way to sing a chorus, is that like suddenly now it feels like I'm reading like a conversation in a book or something like that, and how it flows that way. Because when you sing a song, typically that has a completely different cadence than when you would speak to somebody. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to adopt that into like a lyric. And then I agree with you about Brick by Boring Brick being the most poetic song. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's packaged in sort of like a fairy tale fiction way. So it has this very almost like flowery, not like too flowery. It's not so lofty that it's like, oh my gosh, you know, it's all in metaphor or whatever. I mean, it's very clear that like the illusion means whatever she's, you know, they're trying to portray. But I like the idea of it, of taking a song and kind of putting it into like a storybook, you know, facade to deliver the story. I think that's really interesting. And I'll talk about this a little bit in creativity, but the music video for that song also delivers this sort of like Alice in Wonderland storybook vibe, which I thought was nice to see that connected creatively in that way too. So the only exception is probably I would say on this album, it's probably their most famous song. I can see,
I think it definitely got the most like mainstream radio play.
Right. And when, like, if you were to talk to somebody who, like, knows who Paramore is, but doesn't, like, follow their discography super close, they'd probably still know this song, along with, like, Misery Business, and That's What You Get. I feel like, and, like, you know, maybe
Ain't It Fun?
Yeah, Ain't It Fun, you know, something like that. Like, they have their like, I think this is probably in, like, the top 5, like, most famous songs. I can see why. It's very easy to follow. That repetitious chorus is catchy, but I feel like what happens with this song, at least for me, because I am so familiar with their discography, and I think they have so many better ballads in their overall discography, this expression, the expression I think that they're trying to give in the song, in like the lyric writing, is very honest, but it feels so muted by the repetition that I think it gets old more than it gets absorbed. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like it's like, you know, a song doesn't have to be bad, for you to be like, it's overplayed on play number 20, where some songs you can listen to 100 times and it never feels overplayed.
Yeah.
I think this is a song that hits that threshold too early. And maybe it is because it was one of the more mainstream songs, and so it was being played, on the radio and in the mall, and like you did hear it more. But I think for me personally, that threshold is much lower than other songs on the album, and so it's one that I skip because more often because I feel like I have heard this song too much. I don't dislike the song. And when I was younger, I taught myself how to play it on the guitar. Like, it's not that I dislike the song, but I think comparatively, like if I were to say what is an ideal Paramore ballad, this is not the one. I'm sorry. It's not that I dislike that the lyrics or anything. I think the message is fine. It's just, I think it's how it's built kind of hurts itself. It's its own worst enemy. I also have thoughts about All I Wanted. I like that song personally, and it's simply because the time of my life when this album came out, I was like, I understand, But I think that the problem with that song is unless you have some moment like that, it kind of falls into what you were describing. Like I hate to say this, I hate to use this word. It's the whiniest song on the album. And when you're 16, that's fine. Like, you don't care as much. But when you're a grown adult, whiny has a very specific time and place, at least for me. Maybe your personality is different. Maybe you like whiny all the time. That's cool if that's you. That's not me. Whiny has a very specific time and place if I want to listen to whiny music, and it's very rarely. You know what I mean? And again, I like this song. I think it's a vocal flex, but that's not the category we're talking about right now. I'll talk about it again in singing and vocal ability, but I feel like what's trying to happen in All I Wanted is you have this like encapsulated loss, and then that's cool. Like, I get that. That's, not an uncommon theme, but it does feel whiny because of how long it is and how drawn out a lot of the lines are created. So I think it's great in one category that I haven't talked about yet, but I do think it kind of falls short in the other. But all of that saying, if we were talking about personal taste and preference, again, I like that song. I have an attachment to it. So, but this part of this show is having to dissect and allocate those opinions based on the category we're talking about. If we're talking about lyrics and writing, I agree. I think it's probably the weakest one. I'm just surprised that you said it because I didn't expect that from you. Another song that I really do like, I haven't talked about like the specifics, but I do love the song Feeling Sorry, and I think that the song Misguided Ghosts is so underrated, and I would wager that it's probably one of the least known songs on this album, but I just think it's beautiful, and I love just like how everything kind of it almost feels like, how like when you're reading a book and you're reading the epilogue and everything feels calmer in the epilogue and you like it that way because you've already gone through so much. The Misguided Ghost feels like the epilogue to everything we've heard previously. So I really like that song. I really think it's underrated. I want you to listen to it if you've never heard it because I think it's one of the best songs on this album, hot take. But it's just so the problem with it is that I think it's often forgot about, and I understand why, because when you compare it to a song like Ignorance or Careful, that's like super like anthem-y, even like where the lines overlap, where you're like, yeah, me and my friends are the coolest, So it's like, when you compare it, the energy is not there, but I think lyrically it's just so nice and so poetic. I think it's the second most poetic after Brick by Boring Brick. So all of that to say, I think it's solid, but I don't think it's perfect. So that's why I did 1.5 points out of 2.
Alrighty. So our next category is singing/vocal ability. So this category also has a total possible score of 2, and I gave this 1.5 points out of 2. I think you could say a lot positively about Hayley Williams' vocal ability. I think she's very talented. I think she has a great vocal range. I think the tone and quality of her voice fits this genre really well. I think that because she is also a songwriter, that it's fully appropriate that the songs that are written in the band Paramore are written for her voice as the lead singer. And I think that she does a really good job carrying these songs through the whole album. I think just really, really solid job overall through this album. But again, I don't think it's perfect. I think there are some songs where her voice isn't, and maybe this is just me being picky, but I think there's some aspects where I think her voice either misses the mark, or I think they could have capitalized on her voice better if they had done some things differently. So that's kind of like the overall reason. Also, I think it's interesting to note that this Paramore is one of the bands where, is an example of a band where they have a female lead singer who is the lead singer, and yet they don't have the male band members that do ever sing lead on songs. And I think that, as a band, creatively, you can make that decision. And I think that's fine. Like, I don't think there's anything negative about that. And I didn't factor any of that into my scoring necessarily. But I do think objectively, it lends to less variety in a band's work when there's only one singer. And I think that there are aspects that I really like in this album where the Farrow brothers, sing backing vocals on some of the songs, and it sounds great. And yet, I think objectively, sometimes I wish there was more of that in more parts of the songs, because I think that variety prevents the album as a whole from being not repetitious, but it kind of, a lot of these songs, because of the way they're written and the way they're sung, are really kind of meld together. I think, ignorance can kind of merge into feeling sorry, which can kind of merge into playing God, which can kind of merge into brick by boring brick. Like, so not just in the production and album flow, we'll talk about that later, but even just vocally, you could sing several of these songs back to back to back, and you couldn't necessarily differentiate between when one song ends and the other begins, just vocally, because there's not as much variety in it. So there's kind of an overarching comment on why I scored the way I scored. But in general, I think that this album has her out of the gate at one level, and then she holds that level throughout the whole rest of the album. She does kind of come back down a little bit. It dips, I would say, in The Only Exception, Misguided Ghosts, and All I Wanted. But then, for the most part, she comes out of the gate strong vocally, and she holds that same energy throughout the rest of the album. And I think that is a kudos to the stamina of the vocal artist, but it also is a little bit fatiguing on the ears because we don't have a lot of highs and lows throughout this vocally. So consistency can also include minimal variation and lack of variety. And so I think that's a positive and a negative. So that was kind of another reason I didn't give this full credit. I do really like the guys' backing vocals on Playing God, especially because I think that's a perfect crowd pleaser in concerts.
Yeah.
Backing vocals that they sing in Playing God, I think fits really well for a crowd to sing that part of the song while the lead singer is singing, and kind of that back and forth energy. I think in Brick by Boring Brick, I heard, because typically my way of listening to music, I most often do it in my car. So usually there's road noise, I'm thinking about other things, I'm driving, it's not a soundproof environment. for when we review music for this podcast, I try to put on like a really nice pair of headphones and sit in the quiet. And I mean, I even am a little picky. I prefer to do like an aux-in connection instead of a Bluetooth connection because I think the quality's better. And this is the first time I'd ever heard, because I'm not kidding, I've never listened to this album when I wasn't in my car.
Okay.
So I've never listened to it in an environment other
like
than...
a focused environment?
Right. And that didn't have background road noise and, you know, other people singing along, including myself. And I had never heard in Brick by Boy Brick the backing vocals that are in the last chorus. And they're saying or singing things that are not the lyrics. They're not just singing like a step behind of, you know, or an echo of existing lyrics. They're singing something else. I have no idea what they're singing. I couldn't tell you because I couldn't pick it out. When I review for this podcast, also, I don't repeat or listen to anything. I listen to an album all the way through, and that's it. Like, that's all I get for, you know, reflection for the podcast. But I liked it. I thought it sounded good. I think the only exception does show Hayley Williams' range vocally. So even though I think lyrically it is kind of a weaker song, I do think it's a very strong ballad for her to sing vocally. I don't particularly like the note choice of when she says when you are, the note she hits like kind of down on R. Yeah. It is a little... I wouldn't go all the way to saying that it's awkward, but it is an unexpected choice that I don't know if I like it or not. And I don't mean in personal taste. I mean, objectively, I don't know if if it was the right choice. I don't necessarily have an alternative because I'm not a singer. I don't write, you know, music for, you know, multi-platinum artists, so I'm not gonna to say I have a solution, but I do think vocally it is very different from the other songs on this album, and I like that she sings her own backing vocals as well, and I think it sounds really nice. I think Misguided Ghost is a very nice acoustic ballad, but I think that it's kind of stays around the same 5 notes on the whole song. Misguided Ghost, I think she doesn't really have a lot of highs or lows. It just kind of stays around the same, you know, chord set of notes. And that's not an exact description, but I felt like when I was listening to it, just like listening to Hayley Williams' voice in that song, and I'm like, when she's singing just in the verses, like, I'm going away for a while, you know, don't try to follow me. But it's like literally the variation of notes, it's pretty much the same, like few notes over and over and over again. So I think it's a nice soft sounding ballad, but vocally I don't think there's a lot shining in that. Even though I think in production, which is our next category, I think it's actually done really, really well. I again have another hot take for All I Wanted.
Okay.
I think that looking at this song in 2026, which is when we're releasing this episode, everybody talks about how this is like Hayley Williams' like swan song, that is like the highlight of her vocal ability, because oh my gosh, at the very end she hits that super high note on You and just like holds it. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Like, I don't think it's that impressive. I'm really not that impressed. I'm sorry if that makes me like a really cynical person, but in my view, I think vocally she's really just screaming. She's not singing per se. Like, you could say, oh, that's the way she sings, that's her style. Like, if that's your perspective on it, like, that is fine. Like, if people love her voice on this song, like, that is perfectly fine. I would not say anything negative to Hayley Williams' face because she's Hayley Williams and she can sing the way she wants to sing. But I think objectively, I think she's pretty much screaming out the notes that everybody feels are impressive. And I personally think that the tone of her voice, like in Turn It Off, I think is a like comparison. When she sings and the worst part is before it gets any better, the way that vocal agility she has from going from the worst part is, and that step up she has to take to hit the note on is before it gets any better. We're headed for a cliff or whatever. I think that is more vocally impressive than her sliding up to All I Wanted Was You and sliding up and into more of a scream. I just personally don't find that impressive. To me, it's just like, I think a lot of people, if you're screaming, like, instead of trying to have clarity of tone, it's easier to hit higher notes. I mean, I'm not going to say that, like, I'm anything impressive about singing, but if I'm singing along to this song in the car, I can scream up to that register, and I'm not a trained singer, but I can get there if I'm screaming as loud as she's screaming on the song. And so I think it's a little overblown but oh my gosh, the note that she's hitting is like this super high note. And I've seen videos of some people like analyzing like what notes on the piano, like the scale that she's hitting, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's such a high note. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's not really sung with control. And I think that because of that, it's kind of out of proportion to be as impressive as what I think people are giving it credit for. And personally, I don't think vocally the song is that great. Like, I don't think it's that great of a demonstration of Hayley Williams' voice. And I think we've heard songs that she sings that are much more impressive displays of her singing ability. And this one is just, I think, again, because I think it's this, like, cry in a bathtub song, and people are, like, you know, sing along to it with their mascara running, which I think is great. I think that's why we have music. I say that, like, with a smile on my face, because that's what music brings people together and speaks to
every
people.
Song out there somebody can relate to.
And it speaks to us in ways that is cathartic and therapeutic, and like, it's great. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So I'm not knocking the song and people that like the song and people that like to sing along to the song in their car. I've been there in all of those places for many songs, but I just don't think objectively from a vocal standpoint that song is worth all the hype it gets. And I actually think it's this is going to make me get so much hate, but I think it's almost a negative display of her voice, because I think she's just screaming through the majority of that song. And I think Hayley Williams has a much better talent than what that song highlights. So I actually like took points off for that song because I don't think it's very good. So I know that's like a really hot take. A lot of people love that song, and a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know who Hayley Williams was, and then I heard the song All I Wanted, and oh my gosh, she's an amazing vocalist. And I'm like, there's more out there that's like even better, and like I don't think it's that great. And I'm sorry if you like it, and
it's okay. I'll talk about my differences.
16-year-old Tori loves it. And,
no, it's fine.
You know, it's fine. I'm just gonna go
current Tori likes it too.
I know.
But I have a very different perspective on it that I think will be interesting to talk about.
So that's really all I have for vocals. But I think, you know, it's a very solid album in the same way that I think Riot is a really solid album. And as far as the consistency and the songs that actually, you know, the vocals of this band fit the songs really well. And I think it's pretty common for vocalists to write songs that don't fit their voices very well. But this is pretty solid. So 1.5 out of 2.
All right. So for me, for singing and vocal ability, I gave this full points, 2 out of 2. Let me talk about this. So I really tried hard not to let my own personal Paramore fan bias color this, but I genuinely think it's great. And I'll talk about All I Wanted when I get there. But first, we'll talk about some other things. I think even comparing this, I actually went back while I was prepping for this, and I listened to some of the songs on Riot. And I went back again and listened to a couple of my favorite songs on All We Know Is Falling, which is their very first album. And you can hear the like the more nuanced maturity, I think, in Hayley's voice. And I get it. She was young when they started. Like, she was like 15 when they started recording for their very first album. I think Brand New Eyes, she was like 21, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to go look at her age. She was young, though.
She was really young.
She was very young. And I it's nice to hear like actual, and I don't even want to say like improvement, because she's not bad at all in the first albums. Like, I still think she's fantastic, but you can hear this like nuanced maturity like come out in a lot of the songs, and she makes I hear like very specific almost like emotional choices. We've talked about this a little bit with like some of Taylor Swift's albums, where she does, you know, especially when singers are involved in the songwriting of that song, they get to choose moments where they can inflect their voice to kind of evoke some sort of emotion or expression or whatever that is. And I think that Hayley does that, and she does that more often in this album than she did in the first two. I think it's great. I think that a lot of the choices that she makes feels very intentional in regards to how the technique of how she's singing and where she's singing from. What I mean by that is chest versus head, or full voice versus falsetto. I think a lot of those choices are very intentional, and I like it because there's a lot more nuance in these areas. I also really love how significant some of these background vocals from the Pharaohs sound. So I really want to talk about like the great and significant backing vocals by the Pharaohs, especially in like Playing God. Like you mentioned, you touched on that. The great like repeat sort of audience versus Hayley parts. It feels like we get to sing with the Pharaohs or whatever during those parts. I think it's great. I also think there's a fantastic call and response in where the lines overlap. Freaking love that. It feels very anthem-y. You kind of talked about that in lyrics and writing. I love how that is vocally supported in that song too, where you have your leader calling and your group responding. And I freaking love stuff like that. And that feels very reminiscent to me of the song Born for This from the Riot album, which we talked about previously. It kind of feels like it's the sequel to that. And I really like that. Also, a song I kind of dunked on it a little bit. Well, I'm not really dunked on it, but kind of talked about my issues with The Only Exception. However, I think the harmonies on The Only Exception are some of the best on the album. And they really are so nicely... I don't even know how to describe this other than to say the harmonies on The Only Exception are weighted in such a way that it feels like it's complementing the melody instead of trying to match it fully. I don't know if it means it. I was trying to figure out like if it was mixed a little bit quieter, and it almost doesn't feel like it's mixed quieter. It almost just feels like Hayley is intentionally singing with like less weight. I know that sounds like a weird way to describe it, but it almost feels like that harmony is sung intentionally, almost like, not like a whisper, but just a little lighter on all of the syllables. Like everything's just a little bit flowier. So when you compare the two together, they complement each other really nicely. And I think it sounds very appealing to the ear. Now, everything else, I think it's just nice, consistent, what you can expect from Hayley Williams vibe. I just think that she's one of the better female vocalists of this era, and especially in this genre. In this genre, it's more uncommon for there to be a female lead, and I think that's one of the biggest appeals of Paramore, at least in my personal opinion. Now, let's talk about All I Wanted.
Okay. Let's talk.
I do not necessarily disagree with what you said. However, I think it's intentional and it works. And let me tell you why. So
tell me why.
I will tell you why.
Tell me why.
We talked about how this song is the crying in the bathtub, whiny song. You say you don't like how the vocal feels very screamy. Cool. That's fine. Like, I totally understand where you're coming from. Hayley Williams is a smart enough singer. She could have switched into her nice head voice and hit those notes so nicely and smoothly. I think she's a technical enough singer that she knows that option was there for her, that she could have done it. However, it would have sounded completely different in regards to power. And I personally think, whether you like it or dislike it, I think it was an intentional and emotional choice.
Oh, I agree. I completely agree.
So I don't mind it, because when I listen to it, I think, dang, Hayley Williams was going through it and she needed that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes you just gotta go home and scream in the pillow or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this is Hayley Williams' version of that, at least in my perspective. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
If it's not that, then she's tricking me pretty good. So I don't mind that it's not the prettiest. It's not the most technically pleasing to listen to. I am cool with it. Like, I think it's impressive in the way that she made the decisions she made in regards to recording it. Do I think anybody could scream if practiced enough? Yeah. That's screamo bands exist.
Yeah.
We have all sorts of people doing screamo music as their genre. Anybody can scream if they practice how to do it well. Now, do I necessarily think this song is screamo? No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, yes, I agree. You know, I could scream in the car. You could scream in the car. We can hit the notes. We're screaming. Hayley Williams, I believe to be much more technical and intentional than just screaming the song. So I looked at it as more of a sort of emotional choice. And for me, when I listen to it, what I hear is, I'm buying that. I'm buying that you are hurting as heck right now. So it's almost, in a way, the most musical theater piece on this album. If you had to pick a song on this album to musical theater performance, this is the performance piece. This is the one, I think. So for me, it's not a negative. I just think it's a choice. And, you know, if you don't like it, that's cool. Like, I don't think people are going to always like that, because it is so different than so many of her other nicely executed high note things in this album. But I think it was sung exactly how she wanted it to be sung. And as a listener, I'm accepting of that choice for her. Okay, sure. Like, you know, it's fine. Do I think it's the prettiest? No. Do I buy it though? I sure do. So for me, it's not a negative, and that's why I gave full 2 out of 2 points for singing ability.
No, I think that's completely fair. I think it absolutely is an artistic and stylistic choice, and it fits the emotional tone of the song. So no, I don't disagree with that at all.
And I don't disagree with your take either. Yeah. I think we just look at it.
It's just two different. We're approaching it from two different angles. Right. So yeah, no, I think that's completely valid. I think that Hayley Williams, like you said, if she wanted to sing it with a clear tone and like hit that note efficiently, she could have. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, our next category is production. So this, we call it production, but this is really a time where we can talk about the musical aspects of instrumentation, composition, vocal mixing, aspects of the song, the album. So total possible score of 2 as well for this category. And I gave this another 1.5 points out of 2. So I have a little pattern going on here. I think that this is where some of the songs that I have said negative things on really shine in this category. So for example, the song Careful, which is the opening track of the album, I think that lyrically it's just kind of average. I think that it's an iconic sound. I think it has that great blend of balancing the band's sound with mixing, the various instruments. So this is a band. So Josh and Zach Farrow and Taylor York are all playing instruments. And
Jeremy Davis.
That's right. The 5 of them were all on this album. So all of their work that they are putting into this album is fairly highlighted on this album. Yes. And I love when an album takes care to make sure that every band member's work is put on display in their album. I think it's very common for a band to have a single frontman or a lead singer, and it's like the Hayley Williams band and the boys backing her up. And this album is mixed so nicely, and each song has moments where I think that each band member's musical ability is highlighted really well. And I really appreciate that in albums. I think it's one reason that I think Paramore has sustained appeal, because I think in the genre of more rock-esque music, and I mean rock as the umbrella term, meaning it's coming from a band. People listen to bands because they want to hear a whole full sound of instruments.
Yeah.
And
they want to hear your musicians.
Right.
As well.
And musicians want to listen to other musicians and hear that highlighted ability. Otherwise, if everyone only cared about vocals, we would only have electronic music with a single singer.
Yeah.
And so I really like that everything's.
And there's time and place for that. I mean, we've talked about Owl City, so
right.
I think it's just they're different.
Right. And so I like that care was really taken. I think for Ignorance, Brick by Boring Brick, Looking Up and Where the Lines Overlap, I think that the rhythmic aspect of the song matches the mood and the tone of the lyrics so well. I think it's just this perfect blend of, this is the message of the song lyrically, and here's how that would, if we just took the lyrics out, you could almost still understand the general feeling that the song is trying to get you to feel, because the rhythm and the musical instrumentation of it matches and fits the lyrics really well. I think I like where production wise, and this could go into vocal ability, but I put it kind of in production. There's moments where there is really unique cadence in how the lyrics are sung, and it follows more of the musical lines than it does fitting what may be a solo singer's natural instinct. So for example, in Brick by Boring Brick, when I think it's in maybe one of the verses, like the second verse or so, where Hayley Williams is saying that you have to be sure to build your home brick by boring brick, and that cadence of those lyrics is not to build your home brick by boring brick. She says to build your home brick, and then the kind of
brick
breath
by boring brick.
Yeah. And so like the cadence of the lyrics is really unique, and I think that is I kind of categorize that into production, because I feel like the lyrics are lending weight and direction to the music instead of the other way around, instead of the lyrics all being written first and then we have to fit the instruments to follow the vocal aspect of the songs. I think that Feeling Sorry, again, I think the cadence of the song rhythmically flows and follows the instruments. I think it's one of the strongest songs musically. I think it blends with the vocals really well. I think, honestly, in reviewing this podcast, I think Feeling Sorry is probably the best song on this album, in my opinion. I really found it to be extremely strong lyrically and extremely strong musically, and the way that those components all blend together really well, I just think it's extremely impressive. I'm surprised it's not a song that has gotten as much love as something like The Only Exception has, just as far as like a wider audience. I think it's a good and yet also risky move for an album like this to have an completely acoustic song, and Misguided Ghost is absolutely that one strictly acoustic song. I think it's a big gamble on whether or not it works, and I think it does work on this album. I would say that in our next category, album flow and cohesion, it fits, and I like that but I wish there was more going on than just the same few notes on a guitar string. So I think they kind of lost a little bit of the gamble there, in the sense that I love the sound of it and the vocal work of it and the guitar. I like the guitar, but the whole song is nothing but very repetitive finger picking, and I wish that there was a little bit more variety into pulling into that acoustic sound. I think it was like you said about All I Wanted. I think it was a choice, that was a creative choice that was made, but I think that to me it's missing something to kind of round out the sound. I think an acoustic guitar picking can come across as really beautiful. You know, there are whole artists and all they do is play an acoustic guitar with nothing else.
Yeah.
And, you know, like a Spanish guitar has a certain sound versus like, you know, a traditional Western acoustic guitar. But I think that sometimes when it's just an acoustic guitar, there should be something to kind of fill the sound out. And I think maybe it's because Hayley Williams is singing in like a higher register of her voice and the guitar picking is in the higher register of the guitar. There's no bottom or bass in that song. And maybe that's what I feel like is missing a little bit, is there's nothing to kind of give a little bit of density to the sound and have something kind of pull your ear into a lower register as well to kind of fill that sound out. So I think there was a little missed opportunity there. I don't think it's a bad song, and I think what is in the song is done very well, but to me, I felt like there was a little missing element there. Again, I think the only exception, like you kind of touched on about it being a little bit overplayed and overrated and getting a little bit too repetitive too quickly and fatiguing too quickly. I took that into consideration in this category because I think that falls more into, in my perspective, I think the reason for that is because of the production of the song, not necessarily because of the lyrics.
Okay.
I think you could argue either way. But I just specifically took that credit into the production aspect of it being a little repetitive. And All I Wanted, I think as well, is really repetitive musically. There's not a lot going on in that song either. I think, again, I agree. I think it's a choice. I think it fits the kind of thematic mood of the song, but I think there could have been something to kind of fill it in a little bit more. I like when it kind of comes into I guess there's like an instrumental bridge when the drum kit comes in and the sound kind of swells. I like that production wise. But the beginning where it's really just like a single electric guitar just playing and it feels kind of draggy coming into it. And then I think the outro of it is really long. So again, I think, like you said, I think one could argue that was the point. Like it, you know, it fits the message and the mood of the song, but I do think it's a little bit lacking there. But overall, I think the kind of the highlights of the album and the songs that have sustained in popularity have done so for a reason, and I think that it's because the focus of the production of this album is not just to highlight the singer, it's to highlight the entire band as a whole. And I think that's done really well. So 1.5 out of 2.
Okay. For production for me, I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2. This was the hardest category for me. So I'm going to tell you right now, some of my takes and opinions are going to be hard for me to articulate because I still don't really understand my own opinion on them myself. So sorry that some of this may not come across as like perfectly poetic, but I think we'll just start at the top. We open with Careful, and we have that really nice full band riff going on leading up in that intro. And I think it sets a great pace for the beginning of this album. It's a nice kickstart musically. It captures your attention really nicely and it sustains that. And I think that because of that, the riff, like that opening riff, it kind of just sticks in your head in a good way. Like you want that memorable like riff to kind of stick into your head. I think that overall, every single song on here, we have songs that, raise or lower in energy, as we've kind of talked about. And I think that the band does a really good job of taking each element and adjusting that element for the need of the song, depending on energy, mood. I think things like pacing, or like general BPM, that kind of thing. And also balance. So I think that there are some songs where the guitars are going to be like the main lead, something like Misguided Ghost, which I'll talk about in a more detail in a little bit. But obviously, like, the balance on that, there is no bass or drums on that. So the balance is different than something like Ignorance, where the drums have significant drive in that song. And you can see this sort of balance kind of shifting as each song progresses, so that musically we have, this decent cohesion. Again, I'll talk about that in the next category. But we have this sort of consistency that's happening without it necessarily being super repetitive. I think they kind of hit that balance pretty nicely. But I do have, so I'll do some more specific positive notes, and then I do have a couple negative ones that confuse me sometimes, but I'm going to try my best. I love that we have a song in 6/8. Do you know what song it is?
No.
It's Feeling Sorry.
Oh,
which Feeling Sorry is it's an odd thing to do a pop punk song in 6/8.
Yeah.
I feel like that's not a normal
now that you
thing.
mentioned it. Yeah.
As I was listening to it, I picked up that it was not in 4/4 by the time we were going into the first chorus, and I was like, hold on a second. The counts here are not 4/4, and at first I thought it was 3/4, but it's 6/8. I confirmed that through a little searching. So 6/8 gives this sort of like cool swing to like the rock elements, and I think it was an interesting like marriage of genres. I think it's just to kind of have this like waltzy swing kind of attached to this punk song, and I thought that was really nicely done. So I really liked that. One of my favorite things in music in general is effective use of silence. And this album does it multiple times.
That's very true.
But my favorite instance of it is the false ending in Looking Up. Because you think the song is over. And then the vocals, it's a drum, like, brum, and then Haley starts singing again. And then the whole band comes back in. And it's so satisfying. And I love listening to that song with other people who are not familiar with that song. Because they're like, it's not over. And it's just like a fun plot twist, if you will, musically. And I think it's just so fun. But they do it in quite a few different songs. They do it in Careful. She says, the truth never set me free, so I'll do it myself. Silence. You can't be too careful anymore. And there's a few different instances throughout the album that happens. And I just really, really love that. I think it's so nice. It's almost like, it almost translates like we're going to take a collective breath before we like run into the next thing. And I think that's really nice. In Turn It Off, that song I think is one of the weaker in regards to musical interest. I think it's the most forgettable song on the album when we talk about like the actual music production of it.
I kind of forgot to mention it this entire half of the podcast because
you forgot about it.
I forgot it existed.
And it's not a bad song. I like the song. And I think that there are some really nice vocal like moments on it. You touched on those earlier, but I think musically it's one of the weaker or more boring tracks. But I do kind of like that the way the song outros is that the instruments drop one by one, which I think is kind of an interesting way to kind of like unbuild that. Like it started and now it's kind of like being dismantled. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of feels like an interpretation of that. Now, I have my last great thing. I love the acoustic guitar on Misguided Ghosts. And like I mentioned earlier, I feel like the way that mood feels for this song is that it feels like the epilogue of a story where everything is cool and right in the world, and now you just get to like tie the bow on all the characters that you've gotten attached to. That song feels like the musical equivalent on this album to me of that. So it feels almost like we've gone through all of this noise, not to call any of this music just noise, but there's been so many layers that we've gone through now, all these different emotions and layers, and now it feels like we've come home a little bit. Like when you go home and you've been listening to people and music all day, and you come home and you just want to sit in the quiet for like 10 minutes of your life. That song feels like the equivalent of that to me. So I don't mind that it's one voice and one acoustic guitar with a repeating riff, because I think that the lyrics lend itself to so much like poetry that I don't mind it at all. I really don't. And I think that I completely understand your desire for more. I personally don't need it. I think I'm okay. So I think that song is a very nice and very different breath than the rest of the album has given us so far. So I don't mind it at all. I like the difference in that. Okay, two things that I don't know. This is going to be confusing because I really don't know why I don't like this. So I can't articulate this. And maybe it really is personal taste and preference. But as much as I've talked good about Brick by Boring Brick, I do not like the melody. Musically or vocally. I didn't talk about this in vocals because it reflected in the music as well. But the actual like melody, ba 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 ba, I just don't like it for some reason. This is an opinion I've held for many years. I skip this song almost as much as I skip The Only Exception.
You know, I do too.
And I like the song. I think it's good in every way, but melodically. And I don't know why that is. I can't articulate it to you. Something about the melody is grating to me. I think it's sung fine. It's not the vocal ability. It's not the lyrics. It's just something about what notes they're playing and the sequence that they're played in that I just don't care for very much. I'm sorry I don't have a more like concrete explanation of the dislike. I cannot pinpoint it.
I think part of it, because I feel the same way. I think that the lyrics, or excuse me, the melody of the chorus is like just it's not pleasant.
Yeah, something about it is just not.
And I feel like part of it is because I think it's a combination of all the things. I think like, so go, like, what is it? We'll go get
get your shovel and we'll dig a deep hole to bury the castle, bury the castle. And then it repeats.
I feel like it's like the opposite of a spoonful of sugar when it's like we're singing shovel, which is a very like your head and your tongue and the way that sounds, because it is very down. You have to, it naturally is like shovel is going to be lower, hole is going to be like all of those vowel sounds, and then castle, it's all low, but you're having to like the note goes up. So it's like the opposite of a spoonful of sugar where it's like makes the medicine go down. Yeah. And you say down, but you sing up. It's like a poor rendition of that.
Yeah, and so something
it's just not pleasing to the ear to have all of these old like very low like guttural vowels like, and a ul sound doesn't hit the ear as pleasantly as, you know, other words that end with that L sound, like little or, you know. Yeah. So I feel like it's a combination of that kind of guttural like tone, like word syllable, and yet the note is like piercing much higher than So don't go get your shovel.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
And then it just repeats again.
And it's not just go get your shovel. It's 2 notes.
Yeah,
It's,
shovel. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing?
We come up and then step back down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
So
Charlie Puth, tell us why we don't like it.
So I just don't, again, I can't pinpoint it, but it makes sense. Your explanation makes sense. But because of that, I just don't want to listen to it all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I'll sometimes be in the mood for it, but it's just not.
Which is unfortunate because I feel like the guitar, like, rhythm, that like, it's nice.
Yeah.
I like it.
Like, instrumentally, it's fine in regards to how it's composed.
Yeah.
But the actual, like, melody note pattern, I'm just not a fan of.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then my other thing, and again, I wrote it in all caps, all questions. Why don't I like this album more? I don't know. I can't really explain it. I'm talking about all these positives, and I have a lot of attachment to this album, like emotionally and nostalgically, but musically, why don't I like it more? The second question I wrote is it simply too safe for what I know Paramore can do? I don't think that that's true of all the tracks. I think some tracks are incredibly interesting and layered and, catchy and memorable and all of those things. But I think there are a handful of songs that, while I like them and I think they're fine and they're written really well and I have a lot of attachment to, if I'm looking at the music objectively, I want to like it more. I want to like Turn It Off more. I want to like songs like, especially Brick by Boring Brick. I want to like these songs more. I think they have good moments and good elements, but for some reason, my ear doesn't love it. I'm not quite to like love that. You know what I mean? And I can't tell you what exactly is lacking. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe it's personal taste and preference and I'm putting it in the wrong category, but there's just something, I think this album might just be a little too safe because I have the context of the rest of Paramore's discography. Maybe I wouldn't feel this way about this album if it was the only one I knew from them. Yeah. But knowing their capabilities, the range, I feel like the range, maybe that's it. The range on this album is not quite as wide as I know they can do, which is why I think that I like songs that feel so out of range, like Misguided Ghosts, because they do, it's like, oh, yay, something pretty different. So while I think it's good in some ways, next category, I think that musically there is a little bit of sameness, fatigue, maybe like musical fatigue, but it's not that I think it's bad. I just think, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm talking in circles now, but I just wish I loved it. I just like it a lot, and I think I like, personally, I'm fine with that. It's not like I'm like laying in bed at night going, oh my gosh, why don't I like Brand New Eyes more? But I can't articulate it very well to you. And so I'm sorry, anybody who's like, you can't have an opinion if you can't defend your opinion. I'm sorry, okay? My bad. I'm trying my best, but I can't really pinpoint it verbally. But there's just something lacking there, and I'm not 100% sure what it is. Tried to figure it out right now while I'm talking through it. Still not 100% sure. But all that to say, it's pretty close. So 1.5 points out of 2.
Well, I think I can answer your question with this next category.
Okay.
So our next category is album flow and cohesion. And out of 1 possible point, I gave this 0.5 point. And I think the reason you don't like this, you don't love this album, you just like it a lot, is the reason why I did not give this category full points.
Okay.
And the biggest reason, well, I'll talk about pros first.
Okay.
So I think, interesting, just to point, this is not a negative or a positive. There's no title track to this album, so that is a unique thing with this album, but it is following in the same vein as Riot, which does not have a title track. That is just the name of the album. But it does sort of have a kind of theme like with Brand New Eyes, you're kind of seeing the world in a different way, I guess you could say, is kind of the theme. And so this album sort of follows that in the sense that kind of has this theme where it's like you're seeing the world in a different way, you're looking through life with brand new eyes. It's sort of a like breakup album, and then it kind of progresses and ends with like this kind of band album. Like, it's okay, like we can have this like breakup, and well, actually I don't know if The Only Exception kind of fits in there, unless it's like Careful was like you can't be too careful anymore, and like Ignorance is your new best friend, and Playing God, and then Brick by Boring Brick, and then you get into The Only Exception where you're like, oh, it's okay because I found somebody else, and then Feeling Sorry, you know, I've got no time for feeling sorry, things are looking up, where the lines overlap, and then Misguided Ghost is kind of like this, you know, like the bow at the end, kind of like you mentioned, how it's kind of like the resolution at the end after a breakup, like kind of reflective and looking back a little bit. But then you completely disrupt that whole theme with All I Wanted, because it's like, well, The Only Exception, if it was at the beginning, it was like the love before the breakup, then that would make sense.
Yeah.
But then at the end where you're like, it's okay, we're just misguided ghosts traveling endlessly. You know, we're just trying to do our best in life. But then all I wanted was you. It's like, well, hold up. We were just talking about The Only Exception. Like, you know, so it's not quite, doesn't quite fit thematically in that from like an album narrative throughout. But I don't really care. I don't think you have to have that. You don't
perfectly told story, song to song.
Exactly.
That would be a musical Broadway production.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, it's not necessarily a negative. I didn't take points off of it, but I do think the album would have ended stronger if we ended with Misguided Ghosts and there was no All I Wanted on this album. I think thematically, Misguided Ghosts would be a really nice end. Kind of that mature look back on, you know, anything in life, and it's like we're just misguided ghosts, you know, traveling, and we're just trying to make our way in the world and figure out life, and you know, I'm just one of those ghosts. And you know, so I think that would have been a really nice, like, powerful end to the album, and then All I Wanted is the end of the album. So I don't particularly like that. I think that would have been better, but I do think the first 5 tracks of the song do really have a good narrative. Musically, it comes out of the gate. I mentioned this mentioned this with Hayley Williams. It comes out Careful, kind of like punches us into, like you mentioned, it punches us out of the gate. It's like a horse running out of the gate and maintaining the same speed, and then it maintains, and then it maintains, and then it maintains for 5 songs. And then we get a little break in The Only Exception. And then we're back to full speed ahead again. And we're going to maintain that racehorse speed until we get to Misguided Ghosts. So it is extremely energy-wise. I did not write down the different BPMs of the song. But to a casual listener, it sounds like you're listening to not just rhythmically and energy-wise, but I would even argue musically. It sounds like you're listening to the same song for the first half of the album, then you have The Only Exception, and then you start that same song again until you get to Misguided Ghosts. And you could interchange the sound and content and kind of vibes, if you will. I don't like that term, but you could kind of say the vibe of this song, the vibe of this album, each song is the same vibe for the whole album. And I mean, I'm not saying this is the case, but it sounds to a casual listener, the BPM is the same, the rhythm is the same, the content of the songs are the same. It's kind of like an angsty, like, you're ignorant and you're playing God and you can't be too careful and I've got no time for feeling sorry. All 4 of those songs are essentially the same song. Mm-hmm. Like, just flipped a different way. Even Brick by Boring Brick, we're going to get your shovel and bury the castle because love didn't work out or something like that. You know, like, you could argue that 5 of those songs, it's the same song. Yeah. And then you have Looking Up and Where the Lines Overlap, which are 2 songs that are basically the same song. And then you have your ballads, And the only exception, Misguided Ghosts and All I Wanted, I wouldn't say they're lyrically very distinct, but the way the songs feel on this album, it feels like 3 of the same songs.
Yeah.
And I think it has a great consistent sound. I think thematically, narratively, the sound of the song all is very cohesive. And when you're listening to, like, you throw this album into a massive playlist of songs and one comes up, you're like jamming to it and it's great. Man, this song is so good. But when you listen to the album all the way through, you feel like you've heard 3 songs for a running time of 40 minutes. And it's fatiguing. It's very, very redundant. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing when a band's goal is to tell like a certain story. And I think all the songs, a lot of these songs are written really well. They're really well. But I think to a casual listener, if you're going to listen through this album, you've heard the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally hadn't listened to this album in a really long time, but if you asked me previously, like before I reviewed it for this podcast, like, what's that one Paramore song about, something about like someone being a hypocrite? I'd be like, oh, playing God. Oh no, wait, maybe it was ignorance. No, wait, maybe it was feeling sorry. No, wait, maybe it was careful. Like, I don't know. It was one of those songs.
Yeah.
Because it's all basically the same thing. And I've gotten songs on this album mixed up and I've listened to this album many times. Yeah. And so I think that is why this album is a little bit, it's not their strongest album. And I still think it's a good album. And I think it's done like what they do well. But I think there's a lot of redundancy. And that's the biggest reason I didn't give this full points, because I think it's extremely cohesive. I think, the flow of it works really well. I like that Turn It Off is a little bit slower melodically. I think it's a great segue into The Only Exception. It's a great way to fit a ballad in to kind of like wind down a little bit with Turn It Off and then move into
it's like
ballad.
A mid-pace song.
Yeah. I think that I really don't mind Looking Up and Where the Lines Overlap being back to back. I think it fits thematically into the flow of the album. I think one would feel out of place if you were listening to it, if you put it somewhere else. And then the wind down in Where the Lines Overlap, the song kind of like, the album winds down after that with Misguided Ghosts and then allows you to kind of wind into All I Wanted Was You. And I think that the flow of the album actually does work, even though I don't necessarily think thematically All I Wanted necessarily fits. At the end of the album, it does segue really nicely from Misguided Ghosts into All I Wanted. It has that nice like breathing room of kind of quiet for you to kind of move from one to the other. I do think the outro of All I Wanted, it's almost 30 seconds of just guitar distortion. So I didn't particularly like that at the end. I was like, oh my gosh. Once the guitar distortion kind of...
You just skip?
No. Normally I do, but in reviewing it for this podcast, I was like, okay, I know there's no more lyrics or anything after it. It's just like the same like note. And I looked at the track time and it's literally like 27 seconds of just that to the end of the song. But yeah, I think in general, I do think it's a good album and it's very, very consistent. And I think that's a positive, but I think in doing so, it's also extremely redundant. So I gave half point. So
okay.
0.5 out of 1.
Sounds good. So for me, for album flow and cohesion, I also gave this half a point out of 1 for basically all the same things you just said. So I probably won't take very long. I think whether or not you like the album flow and cohesion and consistency of this album is going to be what do you value most in an album. If you are looking at this as a thematic concept album, it's probably pretty dang good because so much of it is centered around kind of that thread that I talked about earlier, like this sort of central core theme. It does kind of have a little bit of like a character arc, if you will, like in the character, like the perspective of the singer. So like if that's what you're looking for, this is up there for you. But if you're looking for something that flows in a way that is pleasing to your ear, or pleasing emotionally, this might not hit all those marks for you. And that's kind of where it is for me. Tracks, see, I put tracks 1 to 4 together. You put 1 to 5 together, which I think is not bad. I just think that shift happens in track 5. But I think tracks 1 to 4, they're basically the same in both not necessarily musically all of the same, but they are the same energy and the same level of cynicism in all 4. It's bordering redundancy, or it just is redundant. I like all of those songs. We've talked about them. I think they're super fun. I think they are great. Like you mentioned, when they just pop up in the shuffled playlist, you're like, yeah, this song kicks butt. And it does. But when you listen to 4 in a row, now you're like, okay, I'm ready for something else now. So number 5, Turn It Off. I think that's where the first shift happens. And it kind of feels like the next chapter is starting from the singer's perspective, if you're looking at it as sort of like this arcing storyline theme or whatever, because I think the energy, both musically and lyrically, turns more reflective instead of outward. I think that's where that starts, is in Turn It Off. So now we're talking more about how we feel or see things instead of how mad I am at you. Like there's less of a you involved in that track. And it's way less aggressive, way less defensive.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So that kind of feels like where it shifts is in Turn It Off. Now, I thought I was losing my mind. So I went back and listened again. So you have Feeling Sorry, and then right after Feeling Sorry is Looking Up. And when you listen to those songs back to back, which I personally have not done that really since I listened to the album on CD when it came out, and you listen to them in chronological order. It's been a long time since I've listened to this album chronologically back to back to back. The end of Feeling Sorry musically is the same beginning as Looking Up. It sounds like you're starting the song over. Their beginnings are different, but the end of one and the beginning of the other being the same, it feels confusing if you're not familiar with the songs, which I am familiar with the songs, but again, I haven't listened to them like this in their chronological order in a long time. So I thought, I was like, what the heck? Why is this song starting over? Oh, it's not. They just flow like that. Again, this is going to come down to what you want out of an album. If you love that, cool, awesome. That then it's a great tie. But if that's not what you want from this album, then it's confusing. It's disorienting a little bit. You think you're doing the same thing again. It makes 2 songs feel like one very long song. This is not Hamilton. We don't need to segue scenes like that. It's okay to have that differentiating. So again, I don't necessarily think it's a negative or positive. This is why all of this stuff is middle of the road to me, because I think it comes down to what you want. I do think that the flow from Looking Up into Where the Lines Overlap is much nicer because it's distinct enough, but they still feel like siblings. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like it doesn't, like I feel like Feeling Sorry and Looking Up, their transition feels like twins, and Looking Up and Where the Lines Overlap, they feel more like siblings. Like we're still related, but we don't look the same. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's kind of how I feel like those 3 songs, boom, 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 the flow is like that. The last thing I'm going to talk about is ending this album with 2 raw songs. One is raw musically, one is raw lyrically. I love Misguided Ghosts. I've talked about that already. I love how it feels like the epilogue. What that means is that epilogue gets interrupted by a really weird song at the end. I personally think I would have maybe liked that better if they swapped those 2. I know everybody wants the crazy, like, scream your heart out song at the end. It feels like maybe like the cliffhanger instead. But I want the epilogue. I don't want the cliffhanger. So we swapped those 2 because what happens is that what it feels like is we finished Misguided Ghost and we feel like the album should be over. because that was the epilogue. Cool, we're done. Or final chapter where everybody's happily ever after, which the song is not necessarily happy, but you know what I mean. And then we have All I Wanted comes on, and now this feels like the bonus track, which actually the bonus track for this album in the deluxe edition was Decode, which was written for the Twilight. Hear me out. I know we don't talk about deluxe tracks typically. We sometimes mention them, but it's not the focus on the episodes. Hear me out. Let's pull out All I Wanted completely and let's put Decode in there instead. And I think it would have been a better choice. Make Turn It Off, or not Turn It Off, make All I Wanted the bonus and put Decode in as one of the actual tracks. And I get it. Everybody's like, well, that's the Twilight song. It's written for Twilight. Yeah, I understand. But I'm talking about musically. I feel like that would have been a better ending or better choice. Or even put Decode in as next to last and still put Misguided Ghost at the end.
You could put Decode right at the beginning. Have Decode.
That's fair.
How did we get here?
Yeah, and then go into Careful. No, that's fine. I do think that even though it's a bonus track, I do think thematically it does fit this album really nicely, so I agree. But I feel like of all of the songs to end, All I Wanted feels like it doesn't connect the rest of the songs. Mm-hmm. So it feels like it's standalone. So because of that, and you have the very long distorted ending like you said, because of that, it feels so disjointed. It almost feels like I would have rather that song been like a single that they just gave us one day, you know, like it's the single. I also think that song would have been a great song to make a music video for, and they never did, but whatever.
Just be Haley Williams in a bathtub.
Right. But you know what I mean? Like it just feels that one song, while I like it, and I've talked about that, and I've defended this song on this episode, I still think as far as the flow and cohesion and like layout of how this album moves, it's the one song that I don't know where to put it to make it better.
Yeah.
My only suggestion would be to put it next to last instead of last.
Yeah. It would be kind of
But I think some people would be mad about that.
Yeah, I think so too.
But personally, I think I would have rather ended with Misguided Ghost.
You remember when CDs would have hidden tracks?
Yeah, sometimes.
They should have done that.
Yeah. So, all that to say, half a point out of 1, it comes down to what you want with this album. You'll either love it or hate it.
Alrighty, so next to last category, as always, is personal taste and preference. Out of a possible score of 2, I give this 1.5 out of 2.
Okay.
So, themes of 1.5 for me on this podcast. So, in spite of my critiques, this is one of my favorite Paramore albums, but I would say, I kind of echo what Tori says. Like, I don't love this album. I just like it a lot. So I think it is a little sad because a lot of the tracks on these albums are some of my favorite Paramore tracks, but the album as a whole isn't necessarily one of my favorite albums. I did already kind of rag on a couple of the tracks I do think are a little overrated, but I do think in general the sound and the content are still relevant and hold up even 17 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And I do think that even the songs that are overrated, it doesn't mean they're still enjoyable and fan favorites. And truthfully, when I'm in the right mood, I can enjoy them too. So 1.5 out of 2.
Okay. This might be the only time that my personal taste and preference is lower than yours. I only gave this 1 out of 2 for personal taste and preference.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, me too. The nostalgia hits me so hard. This was one of those albums where it came at a very distinct part in my life that was very like, it's one of those times in life, you know, when you like look back at like your childhood and adolescence and you're like, there was a moment where I was doing a lot of changing, and it wasn't necessarily like there was like maybe some painfulness attached to that, and I was a very different person when this came out. And I mean, granted, 17 years have gone by, so like, you know, it's to be expected. Nobody's really going to stay the same that long, but because of that, I feel like a lot of the attachment that I have to the album comes from where I was emotionally. And if I erased my memory of this album and then I went into it with fresh eyes, I don't think I would have the same attachment to this album as I do, other Paramore. I do think I'd like it because I like Paramore. But I think that nostalgia, I do have a lot of rose-colored glasses when it comes to a lot of these songs. I don't think any of them are bad. I really don't. But I know objectively that like my attachment to them is very much ingrained in like who I was at the time, and when the songs hit me for the first time, like that kind of thing. Maybe it's, as a teenager, this was probably one of the CDs that I played the most. Mm-hmm. Like just the most. I still know where my album is, like, and it was in the car, and then we'd get home and I'd take it out of the car and bring it inside to play it. Like I moved the CD so that I could listen to it that much. There's so much lyrical attachment for me due to the season of life that I was in. But if I have to compare it to their entire discography, I know there are ones that I like more, and there are ones that I think are generally better. It's not my favorite album, but the best way that I would describe this album is that it's insanely comfortable for me. That's a weird way to describe an album, I think. But like sometimes there are just things in your past that are familiar and comfortable, and you just sit with that. Mm-hmm. I think I've done all the growing with this album that I will do, and now it's just comfortable. It's just a familiar album for me. And I know that's like a very strange way to kind of gauge my like personal taste for this album, but I think it's right in the middle for me. Again, I don't love it. I like it. I like it a lot, and I think there are very good things, but I think some of the things that I think are so great are because of my personal nostalgic attachment to it, and I think that it would be very different if I was going into it blind as an adult. Mm-hmm. So generally I think there are not much better. I don't want to make it sound like this is bottom of the barrel Paramore. I don't believe that of this album, but there are albums that I think are better in their discography and are more solid. Another thing about it, like especially when we do music, is I always ask myself, is this a no skip album? If it's a no skip album, then that number goes up for me. But there are a couple skips on this for me. Like you said, there are songs on here that in the right time, place, mood, I'm going to enjoy every song on the album. But generally, a normal day in the life, nah, I'm going to skip Brick by Boring Brick. I'm going to skip, The Only Exception, whatever that is. So because there are skips, and this is not a no skip album, again, middle of the road. So 1 out of 2 for me.
Alrighty, so our last category, as always, is creativity. Total possible score of 1, and I gave this half a point out of 1, actually. I don't think this album had as much of an impact as Riot did, I would say, like, culturally, musically, but I really went back and forth on what this album should be, because it doesn't have the impact that Riot has. If you're looking at it now, it's not, like you said, I think there are arguably albums in Paramore's discography after this album that are better and had more like landmark impact on their career, on music, charted differently, kind of changed people's perspectives of pop punk, if you will, or what a pop punk band could do to progress their career. I think you could say that later albums had that kind of an impact, but I do think this album kept Paramore from being a flash in the pan or a one-hit wonder. The consistency and maintaining momentum were some of the biggest impacts of this album. I think it helped the pop punk music stay relevant in the ears of their devoted audience, and then also in a mainstream audience as well. The Only Exception charted on like top 40 radio. Yeah. I think that a lot of people that typically just listen to standard radio play would never have known Paramore until The Only Exception charted. And then, now, I think you could argue Misery Business.
That's What You Get.
That's What You Get. Yeah, those were pretty popular, but it had a very different sound than The Only Exception. And I also think that it's very common in the music industry for a band to have a fantastic album in their discography like Riot and then never catch that lightning in a bottle ever again.
Yeah.
And while I don't think that this album necessarily is objectively as impactful, it's not as fancy lightning as Riot was, I do think this still kept their sound consistent. It kept their band consistent. They have 5 members in this band. They were still touring. Warped Tour was still a thing. They were still making waves in the music industry, and they were still keeping their name and their music relevant for the audience that fell in love with them, even with their first album. But especially the popularity that they gained from Riot. I think this album was a great way for them to keep that momentum moving forward, and that people were like, oh, so this Paramore band, they can make a good album after Riot. So I think for that reason, it was important. So that's the biggest reason I gave it half a point out of 1. I also think this is a decent time to kind of talk about the bonus tracks. And other than Decode, I think most of the bonus tracks on this album are not necessary. They're acoustic versions of Ignorance, Brick by Boring Brick, and Turn It Off.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe the acoustic version of Brick by Boring Brick is a little more pleasing to the ears, I think, for me personally. But I don't think we really need acoustic versions of those songs. I think that the bonus track of Decode, which came from the Twilight album, is a valuable bonus track. But the acoustic tracks, I think it's interesting. Like, they sound interesting, but is it really needed? Does it change anything? No, not really.
Yeah.
It's just an acoustic rendition of an existing track. So, half a point out of 1. And I did think it was interesting, the bonus tracks, like, this album came out, I was trying to look it up, but this album came out at a time where, like, depending on where you purchased your digital copy, you got different kinds of bonus tracks. So I thought that was interesting.
Like, if you pre-ordered through FYE, you'd get this one or whatever.
Yeah, or if you bought the iTunes version, you got this. So, yeah. So half a point out of 1 for creativity.
All right. So for me, for creativity, I also gave this half a point out of 1 for a lot of the same reasons that you did. I think that this was a natural progression in Paramore's discography. I think it, there are some, just lyrically and musically, it does feel like, a step in the more adult direction. And I don't mean adult, like, inappropriate, of course, but just like, it feels a little less teenagery than we did previously, which again, I think those tracks are still fantastic. So I'm not trying to knock that. But it's, this more realistic, mature view on some things, and but it still fuels that, like, distinct Paramore sound and I guess again, vibe may not be the right word, but just like it's very distinctly Paramore at the same time. But I do agree that it's probably not their most milestone-y album. They technically had 5 singles from this album, but I think the only one that really had the huge notoriety was The Only Exception. I'd say Ignorance probably came in at second to that. But when you compare that to Riot, and then even if we look forward into the future, like their self-titled and After Laughter, which had some really big heavy hitters that went like worldwide, crazy viral. This one, while it does all of the Paramore things, it didn't quite have the shine that some of their other albums did in regards to like notoriety or recognition. Now I do want to talk a little bit about the music videos, because I'm a music video watcher, as we know. One thing I did not notice when I was younger and noticed when I was prepping for this is the music videos for Ignorance and Playing God are connected to each other.
Really?
Yes, they are the same location, and there seems to be a sort of overarching plot
Story?
there.
Oh.
So where they are trapped in the dark with the one light bulb in ignorance.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that they are there because they have been trapped, which is revealed in Playing God, where then they escape toward the end of the Playing God music video, which I thought was very interesting. And I thought that was a creative choice to kind of connect those with like a sort of visual storyline that we could follow with the band. And so I thought that was pretty good.
Pretty cool.
But yeah, other than that, I do echo a lot of what you said. So half a point out of 1.
Cool.
So your overall score?
My final score for Brand New Eyes by Paramore is 7 out of 10.
As is mine.
Wow.
So we got the same score. So, but again, 7's more positive than negative.
It is.
So, all right. Well, do you have any other thoughts before we jump into some lightning round?
Nope. Let's do it.
Okay. Favorite track. I have a track list pulled up if you need it.
I have it written down. I think, it's tough because my favorite track for this album changes pretty frequently.
What about Right Now Today?
Probably Feeling Sorry, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Where the Lines Overlap is a pretty consistent favorite of mine, though. So
okay.
I'd say.
I think mine, again, it fluctuates too, but I think I typically will go toward Ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that one's so fun. But Where the Lines Overlap and Misguided Ghosts often float around up there to me, for me too. So, least favorite track.
All I Wanted.
Okay. I'm going to say The Only Exception.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, compared to their discography, I'm not asking you to rank their whole discography, but kind of where does this album fall for you? Is it near the top? Is it very mid-road? Is it toward the bottom for you? What would you say?
I think probably like 4th.
Okay. I think that would be where I'd place it too. Yeah, I think it would depend because music can be so moody, like mood-based, but it's slightly below middle, I think, if I were to compare everything that they've done with what I like. So I think there's only one. Yeah, I think there's like 2 albums that I like less. Yeah. And then everything else I like more.
Yeah.
So
they have 7 albums now?
6. They have 6. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. My bad. 6. Yeah. Because I was trying to think 2 albums. I think there's 2 albums that I like less than this one.
There's All We Know Is Falling, Riot, Brand New Eyes, Self-Titled, After Laughter, and the new one.
This Is Why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like 2 albums less than this one and 3 albums more. So, same for me. Number 4.
Yeah.
Okay. A track from this album that you would like covered by another artist, and who? Again, here's a track list if you need one.
Ooh, that is a good question. This is gonna be like a super wild. This just popped off the top of my head.
Okay.
I was trying to think. I think Misguided Ghosts, covered by Dolly Parton.
Yeah, that would be sick.
She could so do a good number on that song.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. See, okay, I had another thought. Similar genre of artist. This is not somebody I normally listen to, but I've been listening to them more because you like them, and I would want to hear The Only Exception done by Lainey Wilson.
Ooh.
Don't you think that would be cool?
Yeah. I've been falling into a Lainey Wilson phase lately.
That's okay.
So yeah.
But I think that would be an interesting spin, I think.
Yeah. Or you could do like a male singer. I'm trying to think. Like, because Paramore, I kind of like flipping. Like normally, like I feel like it would be a really easy one. Would be All I Wanted by Brendan Urie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He would raise the key 2 steps because that's the kind of person he is.
But I think the band as a whole could do a good, like, maybe like musically, like, push it up a little bit more, give it a little more energy, and then still have not change the melody of the song, but maybe instrumentally change the melody of the song, and then Brendan Urie's vocals would just like.
If I had to pick a cover by a male artist, I think Careful would be done really well by the Ready Set.
Oh, definitely.
I think he could do a great job with Careful.
Yeah.
Because he would change all of those elements to be like electronic, like his style, and I think it would sound really neat that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But
I'm blanking out. I completely just spaced. Who's Brendan Urie the vocalist for?
For Panic at the Disco,
right? Yeah. I was trying to think. I was like, it is Panic at the Disco.
Yeah,
like,
Panic at the Disco.
For some reason, some of the songs, I just like, in my mind, I listen to like Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy at the same time. And so their songs
they're
would,
like interchangeable.
Flip back and forth in my playlist. And I'd be like, is this Panic at the Disco or is this Fall Out Boy? Like, who's it? But so I was like, but no, Fall Out Boy is not Brendan Urie.
No, that's Patrick Stump.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I was like, yeah, Panic at the Disco covering. I would want Panic at the Disco to cover All I Wanted.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. If there was somebody who had never listened to any song on this album, and you had to recommend one song to that person to encapsulate the album or what you think is the best of the album, which song would you recommend?
That's a really tough question. I'm torn between 2.
Okay.
No, I think I would. I think I would set. If I had to pick one, I think I would pick Playing God.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think this is a hard question too. I think I would pick Feeling Sorry.
I was gonna pick Feeling Sorry, but I feel like I picked it for too many things already.
It's okay.
So, I was torn between Playing God or Feeling Sorry.
Yeah.
And I went with Playing God because I think Feeling Sorry is a little bit more like, now having to think like how the songs go. But I think Feeling Sorry is a little more like dialed back on the verses, and Playing God. How do the verses go in Playing God? No, they're both kind of are.
Yeah, they both kind of ramp up depending on. I think
there's a little more throttle pushed forward in Playing God than Feeling Sorry when it starts. I feel like the beginning of a song is so important. If somebody's never listened to an artist before, you gotta like get them with the good hook at the beginning.
I do think that Playing God has that really memorable like cadence to it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a bad choice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all of the questions I have. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I do love this album. This album, I think, is a really good one that when it's fresh, I feel like it really is a great album to just listen to on repeat. And I feel like my opinion of this album, when I first started like listening to Paramore as a whole and getting into their discography, and I was very late to the Paramore game. So it really wasn't until I didn't really get into their whole discography until their self-titled album came out, or around that time, right before their self-titled album came out. And when I did, I was like, oh my gosh, Brand New Eyes is my favorite album. I think that's the best album. I think that's the best one. Like, it's so good. So I think part of the reason that my opinions of this album and my critiques of this album are the way they are is because it's not fresh to me anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you've never listened to this album, this is a great album for like a new Paramore fan, because I think it's so consistent and like the songs are a bop. And so I think even though there are some critiques to be made, once you've listened to a wider variety of Paramore's music, that you tend to realize that there is a lot of sameness here. But I think overall, this was my favorite album for a long time until more of their newer stuff came out, and I kind of like zoomed out and widened my view / ear of their music.
Yeah.
But when they only had 4 albums, this was like my favorite. So I even liked it more than Riot for a time. So,
okay, interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time because we know we did. If you have an idea of what we can review next, you can leave us a comment. We have a suggestion box on our website, which is lionandmousepodcast.com. But you can also comment on the Spotify video and on the YouTube video. So please feel free to do that there. You can also find links to our show notes, Patreon, and socials at our website. And if you could, please review the episode wherever you're listening to us. And if you're watching on YouTube, those YouTube things everybody asks you to do, like, comment, subscribe. We do that because it helps more people see us. So that algorithm really does affect a lot of things. So it helps us reach as many people as we can. So we appreciate the support. Thank you for listening. We will see you in the next one.